Masechet Yevamot, Daf Peh Tet, but we're at Pechet in the middle, Amud Bet in the middle. And now we're going to deal with Amar Shemuel. Shemuel is going to give a fourth explanation for our Mishnah. To review, our Mishnah is talking about a woman who was married, her husband goes away, and she gets a report, let's say from one witness, that he has died. And so she gets remarried based on that report. And now the husband shows up. And so the Mishnah says, this is a big problem, and she has all kinds of penalties. She has to leave both husbands. She gets no ketuvah, children from the second, and if she goes back to the first, the children are mamzerim, and so on and so forth. So this is a major penalty / consequence for her. Shemuel wants to help her once again, and will limit the case of the Mishnah. So he says, Lo shanu ela shelo machashto, aval machashto lo teseh. The Mishnah that gives all these penalties is only where she does not contradict the second set of witnesses, or the husband showing up. And she says, yeah, I guess that is him, right? Hi, husband A. And so then she has a problem, because she is married to B, but husband A is still standing there, so she's got to leave everyone. But if she looks him in the face and says, sorry, you are not he, right? So she denies that this guy who showed up is her first husband. So then we go by her, and she can stay with the second husband, remain married. It's very similar to what Rav said, except that Rav says that if she was married with two witnesses originally, then she stays, because we say that those original witnesses were true, and so we deny that this guy is actually here and alive, this second husband. But here, the focus is on her. After all, she's the one that's going to live with it. If she denies it, then we follow her, and we do not make her break up. Okay, that's Shemuel. Now we ask, B'may askinan? Ilema bebetre. So now we're returning with him. If he comes back and he has two witnesses that says he comes back, or whatever, or two witnesses say he is alive, we saw him. So kim machachashta le mayhaveh. When she contradicts, what of it? Meaning, there's two witnesses that say the first husband is alive. She contradicts it, but her single testimony does not stand up to two witnesses, and it can't be that we would believe her and allow her to stay married to the second guy against two witnesses. Ela bechad. Rather, it must be that there's only one witness that came back and said, this guy is alive, he is your first husband. Okay, Tamad machachashto, aha shatka teseh. So that means the only reason why she can stay married to the second husband is because she denied, she contradicted this witness. But what if she was quiet? If she was quiet and one witness came and says your husband is alive, then she would have to leave. That's the inference based on this case of what Shemuel said. But this is a problem, because why should she have to leave even if she stays quiet based on one witness? Ula says, anytime the Torah says that you can believe one witness, and we're assuming now that the Resha is talking about when one witness originally said their husband is dead. So, since the Torah allows it, remember yesterday we were talking about, is this D'oraita or D'Rabbanan? Here it's assuming it is in fact D'oraita, that we believe one witness to help an aguna to say that a husband is dead. And anytime the Torah says one witness is sufficient, it has the force of two witnesses. It's full force, and therefore, and therefore the second one witness that says your husband is alive should not stand up against the original one who's considered like two. Only a witness that says your husband is dead has the force of two. That's a special law. Any other cases where one witness may be believed does not have that force. So here it's one against one. And really, the first one is more powerful, is like two. So therefore, even if she's quiet, we should deny the claim of the second witness, single witness, and allow her to remain married. So why are you saying only if she denies him, then she can stay, but if she doesn't deny him, she has to divorce? That's not true. So we answer, so rather we're talking about a case of the disqualified witnesses. In other words, the two witnesses that come the second time and say that your husband is in fact alive were invalid witnesses. For example, they were related to each other, or they were women, or gamblers, anything like that. So now we have these two, and we're going to follow the principle of Rabbi Nechemia, de Tanya. Rabbi Nechemia Omer, Kol makom shemina Torah ed echad, halech achad rov de'ot, v'asu shete nashim be'ish echad, kishne anashim be'ish echad. In general, when you have valid witnesses, if you have two men, valid witnesses, testify about something on one side, even if you have 100 valid witnesses on the other side, those are considered equal. Two witnesses, in other words, is like infinity. You kill someone, capital punishment based on two. So it doesn't matter how many, two is like 100. That's true for valid witnesses. But when it comes to so-called invalid witnesses, really these are valid. They're only valid for some things. So women who are valid witnesses to say that a husband has died, or so on, or one or single witness, or people that are related. When you're talking about these categories of what we call invalid witnesses, then so as follows: anytime the Torah says you can believe one witness, and if you can believe one witness, one man, that means that you can also believe one woman or one other type of invalid witness. Anytime any testimony for which that is valid, we follow the majority of the witnesses. So if there's one woman against two women, you follow the two. Or two against three, you follow the three. And in that case, if you had two against one, two women against one man, two women would win out. Because the one man, even though he's not a valid witness, because you need two to be valid witnesses, so the two would beat the one. And so in other words, that's the same as two men against one man. So here's the point. In this case, originally we had one witness that said your husband is dead. And now we have two invalid witnesses that say your husband is alive. If she, the wife, comes and says, I also contradict these two witnesses that they're alive, so she is herself like a testimony that he's dead. So now you have two against two, and so the second two do not have the power to override the first one, because she is joining in, so it's two against two, and they're invalid. The second ones are invalid, and so she can remain married in her status quo in such a case. That's what we're talking about. Or a second answer. Or maybe you'll say, one against even 100, if one witness comes who's a valid witness, meaning is a man, and says, I saw your husband is dead, then even 100 invalid witnesses like women would be equivalent to a man. In other words, when you're dealing with a man who himself is a valid witness, so we do not follow majority. Okay, even if you say that, you could still explain it in a case where originally it was a woman that said, I saw your husband was dead. And we can formulate Rabbi Nechemiah's rule in a slightly different manner and say, Rabbi Nechemiah Omer, Kol makom shemina Torah ed echad, halech achad rov de'ot, ve'asu shete nashim be'isha achat, kishne anashim be'ish echad. Aval shete nashim be'ish echad, kepalga upalga dameh. Rabbi Nechemiah says, anytime that you see the Torah believed one witness, then you'll follow the majority, and you'll make two women against one woman the same as two men against one man. So yes, the majority would win out. But if you have two women against one man, then we consider that to be half and half. So you're right. If it was one man in the beginning, then that would be more powerful. and even 100 invalid witnesses that says she's alive would not matter, and she could stay married, and she would not have to contradict it. Rather, the case Shemuel is talking about is where one woman at first came and said your husband is alive, and then two or more women came. One woman said your husband is dead, and then two or more women came afterwards and said your husband is alive. If let's say two say she's alive, and then so in that case, two is more than one, she would have to leave. But if the wife herself says, oh no, I contradict these two witnesses, I side with the one witness that my husband is dead, then it's 2 against 2, and once again, that remains the status quo. The second two do not override the first witness and the woman herself, and she can stay married. And so that is the case of Shemuel. So we see that Shemuel in the final interpretation does say that at least in some cases, the woman can stay with her second husband because she contradicts the testimony that her husband is still alive. She says, no, I don't believe it. I know he's dead, or this is not him. And then she can remain married. And so this will be a good solution for her, at least in those cases where it applies. The Gemara is next going to go through each of the various stipulations, penalties, and explain them further. So first, it focuses on siricha get mizeh umizeh. When the first husband comes back, she has to leave both husbands, and furthermore, she has to receive a get from both the first and the second husband. Bishlama merishon teba get. Now we understand why she needs a get from the first husband, because she was definitely fully married to the first husband, and then in the meantime, she committed adultery with him. And so that's why she has to leave the first husband. She has to end that marriage. Although it was unwitting, but it was only based on one witness and so on. Okay, so that's why she needs from the first. Ela misheni amai, but why does she need to get from the second guy? After all, since she was married to the first guy, when she did kiddushin and nisuin with the second guy, that kiddushin and nisuin were nothing. If a woman is married already to one man, then she cannot possibly affect a second marriage. So therefore, yes, she has to leave the second guy, but why does she need to get from the second guy? That's the question. According to the Peshat understanding of the Mishnah, this actually would make sense, because, as we said before, because she had she got married based on Bet Din. They said, go ahead, we give you the certificate, you can go and get married. Therefore, her second marriage is effective. And then when the first guy comes back, it turns out she's also married to the first guy. So you have this quasi second marriage, which is impossible to do under normal circumstances, but because in this case the Bet Din got involved and they said, yes, your husband is dead, we believe we believe that testimony, and she went with all the rabbis and chazanim there, right? So then she is in some way married to the second, even on a deoraita level, in the Peshat. Okay, but now we're going with the Talmud's understanding, the Setama de Gemara, which says that really all the that she was only married to the first. The second one is not a marriage, and therefore these are penalties. So we understand the penalty. She has to leave the second guy. But what's the point of a get if they were never married? Zinut be'almahu. It was just unwitting adultery. So if a woman has adultery, even on purpose or unwitting, she doesn't need a get from that second, from the adulterer. Okay, so that's the question. Amar Rav Huna gezerah shema yomeru geresh ze v'nasa ze v'nimset eshet ish yosa belo get. It's a gezerah. It has to do with the onlookers, right? Look at the optics of it. She was married to one guy, and then, okay, he left, and we assume he died. Now she gets married to the second guy. Everybody was at the wedding, and now what are you going to say? She should just leave the second husband and without a get and go marry a third guy. With no get, everyone's going to say, well, look at that. She left a marriage without a get because it looks like she had a marriage. So we need it for optics. Okay, Ihachi Sefa. Well, then look at the Sefa. Sefa means the very next Mishnah in our Perek that we're going to learn in a couple of dapim. That says, the Ketane. Amru la met ba'alech v'nit kadesha. In this case, it's a little bit of a variation of our case. She's married to one guy. He goes away on a trip, and someone says, oh, your husband has died. And then she goes and does kiddushin only with the second husband. But they never consummated, they didn't do nisu'in yet. And then the husband comes back, So, because she only did kiddushin with the second guy, okay, so she accepted a ring, but they never had bi'ah, they were never together, and therefore she can go back to the first husband. And doesn't say anything about requiring a get over there. Why don't you say the same thing? Hatam name nema geresh ze v'kidesh ze v'nimset eshet ish yotza shelo beget. Look at the optics there. People will say, look, the first husband must have divorced her. That's why she did kiddushin with the second one. In those days, they separated kiddushin and nisuin by months. And look, and now she's leaving the second guy without a get, and she's going to go marry a third guy. So you see, look, she left a marriage of kiddushin without a get. Now, even the kiddushin requires a get. That's why nowadays we do it back to back, like just in case they change their mind. We don't want to require that she will get a get. So why don't you say the same thing? The optics. So we answer, olam baya get. You're right. In the sefa, in that case, you do need a get. Doesn't say it, but it's assumed. Wait, now you bring machmir, but by being machmir, you're creating a new problem. Because in this case, you said, she's allowed to go back to the first husband if she only did kiddushin with the second. But that would be a problem of returning a divorcee. If a woman is married to one man, divorces, kiddushin with a second man, divorces, she is the divorcee, she's not allowed to go back to her first husband. That's the Torah problem of taking back one's divorcee. So by requiring a get, now you're going to give her trouble going back to her first husband. We answer, Rabbi Yosef ben Kippar, Damar mina nisuin asura, mina erusin muteret. Rabbi Yosef ben Kippar said that law of machzir gerushato only applies when she was married to the second guy, consummated that marriage. Then that's the problem. She had bi'ah with another guy. She can't go back to her first husband. But if she only accepted a ring, she only did kiddushin, so that she didn't sin. And she wasn't, it's not a sin anyway, that she can marry the second guy. The point is that she was not defiled, as the Torah's word says, with the other guy, hutama'a, because there was no bi'ah. So you don't call it hutama, so therefore she can go back to the first guy. So there you go, the answer is that question. She does require a get, and she can go back. Hold on. The continuation of the next Mishnah says that in that case, she does kiddushin with the second guy. He comes back and says, I'm alive. She can go back to the first husband. And then it says that even if the second one gives her a get, she does not make her invalid to marry a kohen. In other words, she doesn't require a get. There's a general rule that any woman who gets a get, by some requirement, even if it's only the Rabbanan requirement, cannot go marry a Kohen. Even if only on the Rabbanan level. Any get that's required will make her pasul for kehuna. But if it's just a random person comes on the street and gives a random woman a get, though that's not going to make her pasul, because there's no get required at any level. So you see here, since the sefa of the next Mishnah says that even if he gives a get, she's not pasula l'keona, means that no get was required. If you're requiring get, then she would be not able to marry a kohen after as a divorcee. Rather, you know what, in the sefa, change our mind. In that case, you don't have to give a get, because people, the onlookers, we don't have a problem. They'll say, oh, she left that marriage, must be it was not real kiddushin, it was not good kiddushin. Maybe they made a condition on the kiddushin, I'll do kiddushin if you do this, and then that was never done, or there was some problem with the kiddushin, and that's what people will assume, that there was no kiddushin in the first place, and therefore she left without a get. They're not going to suspect that someone left a kiddushin marriage, proper kiddushin without a get. Okay, so that's why you don't need a get in the second case. Now, how about in our Mishnah? Won't people say the same? Maybe people will say the same thing. They'll give the benefit of the doubt, and they'll say, oh, look, she went and married the second guy, and then she left without a get and married a third guy. You know why? Must be that kiddushin and nisuin was actually null and void. Which, in a sense, it was, because she was actually all married to the first guy the whole time. So they'll assume that, oh, something was wrong with the ceremony, and that's why that's why she doesn't need a get. So you don't have to worry about the optics. Okay, so we say, you know what, you're right. Kenasu harabanan. In our case, in the Mishnah, we just make a kenas, right? As we said, because the rabbis were lenient on her in the beginning to allow her to marry, even with only one witness that says your husband is dead. So then at the end, we have to put all kinds of penalties. And one of the penalties, it's a pain. You have to go and get a get. You can't remarry until the second guy, you got to track him down, and he's going to be upset because he thought he was married and this first guy shows up and he has to give a get and all that. So this is an extra penalty that she'll think twice about marrying him in the first place, knowing what a headache it's going to be. All right, so that explains it. Then we ask, how about in the second case, when she did Kiddushin, why not also give her a penalty there? She went ahead and did Kiddushin, and in fact her husband was alive. The cases are different. In our case, our Mishnah, where she did violated a prohibition, meaning she had bi'ah with another man while she was married to the first one. That's a sin. That's adultery. Even though it's unwitting, it's not totally unwitting because there was only one witness in the Setam Gemara's understanding. And so she had some suspicion that maybe it's not 100% proof that he's dead. And she went and did it anyway, and she now had bi'ah with the second guy, so that is deserving of a penalty. But the second case, where she only did Kiddushin with the second guy, so what? She never touched he never touched her, there was no bi'ah, so they did some Kiddushin, it was not valid anyway. There's no reason to penalize her. No sinful act was done. All right, so that explains that clause. Okay, the Mishnah continues, it says, En la ketubah, she does not collect the ketubah from either man. This is an essential line for understanding what a ketubah is all about. And I mention this every time I arrange a ketubah. I tell the couple about this. What is the reason that the rabbis required a ketubah before any marriage is done? So that it will not be easy in his eyes to divorce her. They wanted to strengthen marriage. They didn't want to, on a whim, the guy will say, oh, you burnt the soup. Okay, that's it. I'm divorcing you. He'll say, oh, you're so upset. You're angry at her. Okay, fine. You can divorce her, but you have to pay $200,000. The guy will say, you know what? Okay, I forgive it. All right. We'll stay married. They'll learn how to make up. So this will give incentive to the guy to work out his marriage and make peace. And therefore, that's the usual reason for ketubah, to put a stoppage and not have any a quick divorce for little reason. Okay, but in this case, we want them to get divorced. That's what they're required. She has to leave and get a get from both the first husband and the second husband. Since we want to encourage, in this case, both men to give a get and leave them, therefore we're going to make it easy. It's not good for her, she doesn't collect, but that's part of the penalty. That's the situation. Okay, and la perot v'lo mezonot v'lo belaot, she does not get, well, let's focus on mezonot here. She does not get food. Usually when someone's married, the guy has to pay she'era, he has to pay kesuta, he has to pay for her food and sustenance. So how come she doesn't get that from either husband? The answer is tenai ketubah, kichtubah dameh. This is one of the conditions in the ketubah. The ketubah isn't only the basic amount that he has to pay at the end of the marriage, but also during the marriage, he has to pay for food. That explains that. Belaot also, if she brings in clothing in the beginning of the marriage, they are assessed. At the end of the marriage, she gets the old clothing back plus the amount of what they were worth. That's part of the Tanai Ketubah. Since she loses her Ketubah, she loses that as well. Perot is a bit more complicated because Perot, during the marriage, if she brings a field in, then the husband, gets the produce that it produces. So what do you mean, en la Perot? So it could mean that the second marriage, while they were married, before the first husband came, he was eating the perot. She doesn't get it back. That's one. Another point here is that he gets the perot in exchange for the husband's obligation to pay a ransom should his wife ever get captured. And so in this case, that's part of the ketubah, and that's the exchange. That's for the perot. It's kind of ransom insurance. But in this case, since she doesn't deserve her ketubah, if she gets ransomed, he has no obligation to redeem her. Since he doesn't have an obligation to redeem her, then he doesn't deserve the perot. So saying she doesn't get the perot is another way of indirectly saying she doesn't get ransom if she's taken captive. All right, natala mizeh umizeh. Now, if the wife does somehow collect her ketubah, she finds a way to collect it, then she has to return the money back to each of the husbands. We say pishita, of course, if she wasn't deserving of it, and she took it, of course she has to give it back. No, ma'odetema kevada tafsa lo mapekinan mina kamashman. You might have thought that once she grabs it, since technically it does belong to her, it's only a penalty that the rabbis impose. So therefore, if she has it already, maybe we'll say, okay, status quo, you have it already. We don't make her return it. But this is to teach, yes, actually, you even make her return it. The next part of the Gemara is going to begin a long discussion. It's going to go all the way to the next daf, but a very interesting one about, do the rabbis have the power to suspend a biblical law, a deoraita law, in certain cases? We're going to see that Rav Chisda says yes, they can. Okay, but let's see the case that we're going to be speaking about. Habalad mamzer. We're going to be talking about the fact that in our Mishnah, it says that in this case, the woman, the children she has with the second husband are mamzerim, which makes sense because she was married to the first guy, so those are children from adultery. Even if it's unwitting, they're still mamzerim. But then it also says if she goes back to her first husband and has more children with him, they are also mamzerim. And the question is why? After all, she is married to him, and so unwitting adultery in the meantime will not make mamzerim, will not make children she has back with her first husband mamzerim. So what's the reason for this? It seemed to be a derabanan that's uprooting a Torah law. That's where we're headed. But first, we're going to see a whole bunch of laws regarding terumah. And remember that the Talmud Bavli does not have any Gemara for Zira'im, for terumah. So this will have to stand in. So we get to learn a little bit of terumah laws. And that will transition back to this mamzerut law, and then into the long discussion about uprooting laws from the Torah. Tenan hatam, we see in Masechet Terumot, en tormin min hatameh al hatahor, vim taram beshogeg terumato terumah, bemezid lo asa velo kelum. You're not allowed to take terumah from tameh produce for tahor produce. The idea is if you have tahor produce and you separate tahor, you separate from it itself, you give it to the kohen. That's the ideal case. The kohen then can eat the terumah in a state of tahora. But if you have some produce that's tahor and some that's tameh, and now you're going to take from the tameh and you say, I'm taking from this tameh produce, and that'll be terumah to cover the tahor. So now you're cheating the kohen out of something he deserves, because you have to give it to him, and he can burn it for fuel, but he can't eat it, so it's worth less than the tahor one. So therefore, one is not allowed to take from the tameh to the tahor. This is a rabbinic law. Biblically, it works. Biblically, any produce for the same produce is fine, whether it's tameh or tahor. But the rabbi said this is not a very nice thing to do. So now, in b'di'avad, if you did it, then it is terumah, b'di'avad, right? It happened, it works, because on a biblical level, it's fine. B'mezid, now if you did it on purpose, the first one is if you did it by mistake. If you did it by mistake, you didn't realize. Okay, so then you go ahead. There's no reason to penalize. But if you did it on purpose, lo asa velo kelum, so we say you did nothing. This terumah that you took from the tameh pile is not terumah. Well, we're going to see. There's two interpretations of it, right? This terumah you took is what everyone agrees, this is that the pile that's tahor, you did not take terumah from. You have to take terumah again from that pile. Okay, so that's the braita. Now, Mishnah. My lo asa velo kelum. Now the question is, what does this mean that he did nothing? We have a strong reading and a weaker reading. Rav Chisda says literally this act was like a zero act, as if he did nothing, to the extent that this grain that he took from the tameh produce, you can put it back. It's tebel. It goes back to being tebel. It's not terumah at all, and then you have to go and do it again and take terumah from the tahor. This is going to be the source of our question, because on a biblical level, you took terumah. It is terumah, and now you're saying put it back, and then you're going to eat it. I mean, you'll take terumah from that, but then you can even you'll end up eating part of that terumah. So that's the question. Anyway, that's the Chisda with the stronger reading. Rav Natan v'Rabbi Oshaya amar lo asa v'lo kum letaken et hashirayim aval teruma have Rabbi Natan v'Rabbi Oshaya says when the Mishnah says he didn't do anything, it doesn't mean nothing at all. It means he didn't do anything to fix the pile that's tahor, because that on a rabbinic level you still have to go and take terumah for that. But the terumah that he did take from the tameh pile, that will in fact be terumah, because on a biblical level it's terumah. We're just going to make you go and do it again. That's the machloket. Now a conversation. Rav Chisda lo amar ke Rav Natan b'Rabbi Oshaya. De'i amar taveh terumah simnin de pasha velo mafrish. How come Rav Chisda did not agree with Rav Natan? He makes sense. Right? You took terumah. Biblical level is terumah. So his answer is because if you say that what you took from the tameh pile is in fact terumah, then you're going to have people who will be negligent, worse than negligent. They're going to violate, and they're not going to separate again. You're going to tell them, oh, okay, if you tell them this is terumah, but you have to do it more, you have to give another terumah from the tahor, because you didn't do it the right way, the ideal way. So people are going to say, wait, this is terumah, so therefore it works, and I'm not going to listen to the rabbis and take terumah again. So therefore, it's better to put the terumah back, even though that's going to violate a biblical law by putting that terumah back. Better to do that so that when you tell people, oh, put the terumah back, then you're going to say, oh, I didn't take any terumah. And then he'll for sure do it the right way. So to ensure compliance, we're going to basically uproot a biblical law. Okay, that's going to be the source of the question in a few minutes. But before we do that, before we get there, we're going to compare this Mishnah to other Mishnayot and Terumot that have similar cases with slightly different outcomes. So we ask, Ma'ishana mahadetnan, hatorem kishot v'nimset mara, abatiach v'nimset saruach teruma, v'yachzor v'yitrom. We have another Mishnah there that says, if you take cucumbers or melons, you take teruma, and then afterwards you realize that they're bitter, and it's not proper to take terumah from something that's spoiled, or a melon, and you take it, and turns out the melon is spoiled. So this is terumah, and you should take terumah again, because this terumah is not proper to give terumah that's spoiled. Therefore, one should give terumah again. This is a challenge to Rav Chisda. How come in the previous case where you took from tameh to tahor, you say, put it back, it's not terumah, and you have to do it again. And in this case, when it turns out to be spoiled, you say, it is terumah, and you have to do it again. Why don't you worry that if you say it is terumah, then people aren't going to do it again, and they won't be compliant? That's the question to Rav Chisda. And so we answer, Shogeg amezid karamet, shogeg la'avad isura, mezid ka'avad isura. You're asking from a case of shogeg, this case where he didn't realize he took the melons, and then afterwards he says, oh, look, it's spoiled. He didn't do it on purpose. So there's no reason to penalize him if he did it by mistake. Terumah is terumah. Whereas in this case, he knew it was tameh. He says, I'm gonna cheat the kohen. I'm gonna take from tameh and give him something that's cheaper. For the tahor. He did this on purpose, so then we really have to make sure that he'll be compliant, and only in that case we will override the biblical law and make sure and put that terumah back, so that for sure he will do it again. All right, that answers that question. But now more questions from other cases that are similar. Verameh shogeg ashogeg, hacha katane beshogeg terumato terumah, hatam katane terumah v'yachzor v'yitrom. Okay, so let's ask the two shogeg cases. In our Mishnah, the first Mishnah that we mentioned, to take tameh on tahor, if he did it b'shogeg, the first Mishnah said, terumah is good. Whereas, regarding the spoiled melons, it says, b'shogeg, terumah, and you have to do it again. How come you have to do it again in this case? You didn't say you have to do it again in the previous case. And the answer is, hatam shogeg karov lemezid, dibayale limit. In the case of melons, it's true, it is shogeg, it's a mistake, you didn't do it on purpose, but it's almost doing it on purpose, because you should have tasted it. Before you take terumah, taste a little, make sure it's good, this is going to be nice, proper terumah, and only then separate it fully. So therefore, in that case, teruma, and you have to go and do teruma again. All right, we answered that. Now let's ask two questions regarding mezid. Mezid a mezid hachakatane bemezid lo asa velo kilum. In our Mishnah, from when you have tameh on tahor, it says you did nothing, and you have to go and take teruma again. Whereas we have another Mishnah, This is now a third Mishnah that we're quoting, and this is one is from Demai. Hatam tenana Torah mishe'en nakuv al nakuv teruma ve'achzor ve'yitrom. If you take from a pot that has no hole in it upon a pot that does have a hole in it. So the law of teruma is that if it's connected to the ground, to the land of Israel, even if it's in a pot, but the pot has a hole in it, that's also connected to the ground, then you have to take teruma deoraita. But if you grow something in a pot, with a pot that has no perforation, so it's not actually connected to the ground of Israel, then you have to take teruma only midirabanan. So in this case, if you take from a pot that has no hole, that's only dirabanan. You say this will be teruma for the produce in that other pot that does have a hole. This is a problem. It is teruma because you did designate it and you need to take this teruma dirabanan, but it's not going to help for the deoraita in the perforated pot, so therefore you have to go and take teruma again. So how come in this case we say you take it is teruma and you take teruma again, whereas in our case of tameh and tahor you say you didn't do anything? That's the question, and the answer is bitre maneh sayit bechad mana la sayit. A question to Rav Chisda, and so Rav Chisda will answer, when it's in two different vessels, the person will listen, he will be compliant, because it's obvious, it's more obvious that, oh, this one is in one vessel, this vessel has no hole in it, the other vessel is perforated, so you tell people, listen, this one doesn't work for that one. He's like, okay, that makes sense, he'll agree, and he will take from the other one. But in our case, when tameh on tahor, let's assume that they were all grown together in one area, one field, or one pot, and half of it became tameh, and half of it is tahor, and the person takes from the tameh on the tahor. And in that case, if you tell the person, oh yeah, it is teruma, but take again, they're not going to listen because it was all grown together, and he knows it's all the same. So that case is when we have to say, you know what, you did nothing. Put the teruma back, it's nothing, and make sure to take again, because we have to assure in compliance when it's all in one pot. Good. Ulav Natan b'Rabbi Yoshai Damar lo asa velo kelum letaken shirayim aval teruma have ma'ishena mehaditnan min hanakuv al she'en nakuv terumato teruma velo ta'achel ad sheyosi aleha teruma ma'aser makom acher. Okay, now to turn the question to Rav Natan b'Rabbi Yoshai. He's the one that said that when the Mishnah says you did nothing, it means you did nothing to fix the tahor, but the teruma, the tameh teruma that you took remains teruma. He doesn't make this gezerah for compliance. Well, according to him, we have yet another question where the Mishnah says if you take from the pot, this is the opposite case. Now, if you take from the pot that does have a hole in it, for the teruma that has no hole in it. So now you took a deoraita, you're taking this, but you took it for something that doesn't require teruma deoraita. So if you're just taking teruma for nothing on a deoraita level, then it's not even teruma what you took. So we say it is teruma because you took it after all, but don't eat it until you take teruma and maaser on that bunch that you took for teruma. You have to take teruma and maaser within that, from yet another place. In other words, in a regular case, when you take teruma, so you separated teruma and you gave it to a kohen, it's totally fine. But in this case, because you're taking teruma from the pot that has a hole in it, but you're taking it for something that doesn't require teruma on a doraita level, so really that doesn't become teruma on a biblical level. And therefore, if you're going to give it to the kohen's going to be eating tebel. Because you separated it, but the separation is not valid, and therefore you can't give him tebel. So you have to take teruma and maaser from that for that terumah that you can end up giving to the Kohen to take care of it. So that's the question. According to Rabbi Oshaya, if you say it is terumah, how come in our case, tameh and tahor, you don't say that you have to all go ahead and again take terumah and maaser from the piece that you took, whereas in the case of the taking from the pot with a hole to the pot not with a hole, he does say that you have to take terumah maaser from that portion that you separated. And the answer is Shanehacha de Midoraita Teruma Ma'al Yatahi Kede Rabbi Eli Damar Rabbi Eli Minayin La Terumin Hada'a Ala Yafa Sheturumato Teruma Tichti Velo Tisu Alav Chet Barimechem Et Chelbo Mimenu. So here our case of Tameh Tahor is different because on a Doraita level, the portion that you take as Teruma is in fact a good terumah. So you don't have to take terumah and maaser on that from that portion. It is terumah on a doraita level. You give the whole thing to the Kohen. How do we know this? From Rabbi Eli, who says, how do we know that someone who takes from bad produce for good produce, right? You take the worst one, either because it's tameh or it's spoiled, not the best quality. If you take from bad to good, it nevertheless is terumah. It is valid. It's not nice to do it, but it is valid to terumah. How do you know? Because the pasuk says, "Do not bear a sin because of taking chelbo, the best." Setting it apart, right? You shall bear no sin by reason of it, seeing that you have set apart from its best. From here we learn that you're supposed to take from the best. And if you don't, there's a sin. Now what do you mean a sin? If the terumah does not become sanctified, then why would there be a sin? It only makes sense to say there's a sin if the separating is effective, right? If I do something that's not effective, if I say I'm going to take terumah, this pen is going to be terumah for the produce, that's nonsense, right? It's not a sin. It's just it's a meaningless statement. It doesn't become terumah. It can't have a pen is not terumah. It's not produce. So here, the fact that the Torah says that it is a sin, it's not the right thing to do, means that it is effective. That's there you go, and that answers the question that we had against Rav Natan Rabbi Oshaya. Okay, now Amar le Rabba le Rav Chisda. לדידך דאמרת לא עשה ולא כלום כל עיקר, דאפילו ההיא גריבה הדר לטבלה, מהי טעמה? גזרה דילמה פשע ולא מפריש. מי אמיתי דמדאורייתא הווה תרומה. משום דילמה פשע הפקו הרבנן לחולין, וכי בית דין מתנין לעקור דבר מן התורה. Okay, all this was now to get to this fundamental question. Rabbah is going to be the one that's challenging Rav Chisda this whole time. Rav Chisda, just to preview, is going to say, yes, the rabbis have the power to uproot a biblical law. Rabbah is going to say, no, you can't do that. So Rabbah is challenging Rav Chisda here. He says, according to you, that when you interpreted, when the Mishnah says you did nothing, when you take the tameh for the tahor, you put it back, and even that amount that you took, it goes back and becomes tebel. Why? You're saying gezerah, we want to make a fence. Because maybe the person will sin and he won't end up doing it again. Because if you tell him this is terumah, he'll say, see, I took terumah. He's not going to he's only care about the biblical level, and he's not going to go and do it again. He's not going to be compliant. Fine, that's what you said. Now here's the question. Is there anything that on the Doraita level it is terumah, and because the person may be negligent and not be compliant, the rabbis can undo it and turn the terumah into chulin? Can Bet Din stipulate and uproot something from the Torah? It's a very good fundamental question. What is going on here? Okay, so you'd expect Rav Chisda to be like squirming, saying, no, I didn't really say that, it's a different way, but instead he confronts him head on. Amar levat lo tizbera, and you don't think so, Rabbah? Of course the rabbis can uproot something from the Torah. Don't you agree? And here, now we're coming back to
our Yevamot Mishnah. V'hatenan havalad mamzer mizeh umizeh bishlama misheni mamzer ela merishon amai. In our case, when the woman is married and he goes away and they say he's dead, and she goes and remarries, and then the husband comes back home, and the penalties are, or consequences are, that there's both children from both husbands will be mamzerim. Any children she had or will have with the second husband, and any children she will have with the first husband are mamzerim. Now we understand regarding the second husband, because she was married to the first guy, and the second husband is just adultery. And whether shogeg or mezid, it's still the child is a mamzer, child born from adultery. But the first guy, what's the reason? Ishtohi v'isramalyahu v'kasharina le b'mamzeret. That's his wife. The first guy, he was alive the whole time. They were married the whole time. So he's having relations with his wife. He is a full-fledged Jew. He's not a mamzer. There's no problem like that. And yet, now what are you going to say? The child is a mamzer? You're uprooting a bad thing, a law from the Torah. Because if you say that a child that they will have is a mamzer, then that child will go marry a mamzeret. And since on a biblical level, the son is not a mamzer, and now is going to marry some woman who is a mamzeret, so you're saying that our Mishnah says you can violate a biblical law. See, and that's our Mishnah. So there's a proof that yes, the rabbis can uproot, right? And they did all this as a stringency, as a penalty, understanding it now according to the Setamad de Gemara, not according to the Pashat of the Mishnah that we explained yesterday, but the Setamad de Gemara, that all these are rabbinic penalties. See, the rabbis have the power to uproot a law from the Torah. All right, that's Rav Chista's counter. Yes, they do have the power. Now Rabbah says, Amale, Hachi Amar Shemuel, Asur b'mamzeret, v'chen ata Rabin Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Asur b'mamzeret. He says, no, I disagree with you. Rabbah says, no proof from this Mishnah, because Shemuel and Rabbi Yochanan said that although a child from the first marriage we call a mamzer, but they're not really a mamzer. They cannot actually marry a mamzeret. If it's a boy, cannot marry a mamzeret. So why calling him a mamzer? Only to the extent that he cannot marry a kosher Jew, but also cannot marry mamzer. It's kind of like a mamzer midrabanan, which is in a way worse than being a mamzer deoraita. It's like being a mamzer misafek. In that, the rabbis declare him to be a derabanan mamzer, cannot marry a kosher Jew. But since it's not a doraita mamzer, you cannot override a biblical law and have him marry a biblical mamzeret. So no, this is not a case. The rabbis did not uproot the law from the Torah here in this case. All right, so the Rabbah and Rav Chista both explained how they understand this Mishnah, but the conversation is not over. Shalach le Rav Chista le Rabbah. They continued their conversation by correspondence now. And Rav Chista sent a message to Rabbah. Biyad Rav Acha bar Rav Huna. So he told Rav Acha, go tell Rabbah the following challenge. Ven betin matnin lakol midavar min haTorah. Are you sure? You really sure? Right? And he's going to bring more sources that, yes, they can uproot it. V'hatanya. After all, we have a baraita. Question is, if a man is married to a minor woman whose father died, if the father is alive, the father can marry off his daughter on a biblical level. Even as a minor, she will be fully married. But if the father died, then not. There was a problem, however. A girl without a father is not protected and could be taken advantage of. And therefore the rabbis came and said, we'll give the mother or older brother the right to marry off this orphan girl to a man. And that way, this husband will be able to protect her and she'll be okay. Now, it's not a full marriage. It's only a derabanan level marriage. Only when she grows up, then it will become a full marriage when she becomes an adult at 12. Then it's a full marriage. And before that, she can always object and say, I don't even like the guy, and then it's undone, and the whole thing is the Rabbanan anyway. So now the question is, usually a man inherits his wife. If she dies, a man inherits the wife. What if this girl is married off as a minor,
and then in the meantime she dies. So will this husband inherit her? Is this marriage considered solid enough that he has a right to inherit her? Or do we say she's still a minor? The marriage was only d'Rabbanan. She might have objected beforehand had she been alive, and therefore he does not have a right to inherit her. So at what point does the man inherit his minor wife's property if she dies before she becomes an adult? There's three opinions. Bet Shammai says she has to reach maturity. She has to become an adult by age or by signs, and so only then is it a full marriage. So you have to wait the full time. Bet Hillel says no, as long as she does chuppah. Beforehand she did a kiddushin, this type of kiddushin where the mother does it. When she does chuppah, she stands under the chuppah, they do the wedding nisuin ceremony, then they are fully married. Presumably she wouldn't do mi'un after that, even had she remained alive. Rabbi Eliezer says when they cohabit, when they consummate the marriage, then they are fully married. Then they are fully married or married enough that it's solidified, and she would not do mi'un after that, so he deserves the inheritance. Now, these three opinions apply to two other laws too. Not only v'yorsha does he inherit her, umitamela ve'ochelet begino teruma. If he is a kohen and when she dies, then he can become tameh for her, even though it's only the Rabbanan marriage. You might say maybe he can't. Yes, he can. And he can entitle her to eat terumah even at this stage, even though she's a minor. And you say, well, so the Rabbanan marriage, even so, she can already eat terumah. We're going to ask about each of these things because each and every one of them are in a way uprooting a law of the Torah. So before that, we want to clarify these three opinions. They're not as clear as they say. Bet Shammai omrim mishita'amod bekomata. Af agav delo nichnesa lachuppah bet Shammai. You say that he will inherit her as soon as she stands at her height, meaning she reaches full maturity, becomes an adult. Even if they didn't do nisu'in yet, that doesn't make sense, because in a general case, a woman, an adult woman, would not be able to eat terumah, and the laws of full marriage do not kick in until nisu'in, not at kiddushin. So he's saying, and wouldn't require chuppah? And he will answer, Ema mishetamod bekomata v'tekanes chuppah. No, what I meant to say is when she becomes an adult and she does chuppah. You need both. So Bet Shammai is the most machmir, I guess you could say, requires everything like an adult and chuppah. And you understand this, that that Bet Shammai told Bet Hillel, "Tekamritu mishitenes chuppah, yamda bekomata mahanya la chuppah, v'ila la mahanya la chuppah." How come the Bet Shammai didn't say that it's required to have chuppah if they thought that? Because they were only responding to Bet Hillel, even though here Bet Shammai is quoted first. Maybe the original conversation was the other way, and Bet Hillel said you have to need chuppah. Bet Shammai says, this is what you say, you need chuppah. We agree you need chuppah, but that's only after she also becomes an adult, then the chuppah works. But without being an adult, chuppah does not work. Okay, that clarifies him. This is when they cohabit. Hold on, Rabbi Eliezer, in a different context, says that the actions of a minor girl are nothing. She cannot possibly be fully married, even with cohabitation. Even if she does chuppah, it doesn't matter. She's a minor. There's no way she can have the mindset in order to fulfill full marriage. So, rather, must be that means she grows up, and she's an adult, and then she has bi'ah, that consummates the marriage, then they're fully married, and only then he can inherit her. So according to Bet Shammai and Rabbi Eliezer, actually she has to become an adult, at which point it would be a deoraita marriage. So we're going to focus on Bet Hillel, who says that he can inherit her even
while she is a minor, as long as you have chuppah. So here's the question that Rav Chisda is building up to. Katane mihat yorsha. So nevertheless, it says, according to Bet Hillel, at least, as a minor, he can inherit her. And here we have in the Doraita law, her father, she's still under her father's domain. Now her father's dead, but it means her father's household. And yet, so the father's household should inherit her as a minor if she dies. That's Doraita. On a D'Rabbanan level, the rabbis come and say, you know what, we will consider this marriage, we will consider this marriage good enough that the husband can inherit the husband. So here the rabbis are uprooting the Torah law of inheritance. See, Rav Chisda tells Rabbah, the rabbis do have the power. But he answers, no, hefker betin haya hefker. This is just a monetary law. Regarding monetary laws, a court has the power to declare anything ownerless. Like eminent domain, right? The government can come and say, we need this house to build a highway. So too, the court can always say, this thing that is your property, we say it's not your property anymore. And so they're not really uprooting a Torah law. They're just reassigning, they're taking away the property from her family. And how do we know that hefker betin hefker? This is a principle we see in lots of places, and here's the source. Tamar Rabbi Yitzchak, menayin shehefker betin hayefker shenemar kol asher lo yavod shloshet yamim be'asat hasarim hazikanim yachoram kol rechusho v'hu yibadel mekehal hagola. In Ezra, see when he comes from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael, he sees that the people are all, many people are intermarried, and he wants the men, Jewish men, to leave their foreign wives. And he has to call them to a meeting, and he says, anyone who does not come in 3 days, according to the council, to the council of the princes and the elders, all of his property will be forfeited. Now, what gives Ezra the right to take away people's property? There it is, right? He is in charge. He's the betin, and so you see a betin has the right to confiscate property. That's one proof. Second proof, it would be El-Azar Amar. Me'acha el lehanechalot asher nichalu El-Azar HaKohen v'Yoshua bin Nun v'Rashi Avot lematot b'nei Yisrael. And Yeshua describes the inheritances, the tribes, and the pieces of land that each of the tribes of Israel got. It says these are the inheritances that Elazar and Yoshua bin Nun and the fathers of the heads of the fathers' houses for each tribe gave to Bnei Israel as inheritance. Now, v'chima inyan rashim etzel avot. What do you mean? Who are these heads of the fathers' houses? Ela lomalach ma avot manchilin b'nehem kol ma sheyirsu afrashem manchilin etam kol ma sheyirsu. Why does he use an unusual formulation? Why don't you say the heads of the tribes? What do you mean the heads of the fathers of the tribes? Oh, because it wants to say that the heads of the tribes have the power like fathers do. Just like a father can decide to give his children an inheritance however he wishes. He can divide it up as he wants. So, in other words, he has power over the inheritance. So, too, the heads of a community, meaning the court, have the power to give to anyone they want any property that they want. The second proof is even stronger than the first. And the first is not just confiscating. It doesn't say that they can assign to someone else. And the second one also, it adds that they can not only take away, they can also assign something to whomever they wish. And therefore, this is not uprooting a law of the Torah. This is monetary law, and the rabbis can always reassign property without having to undo the original biblical law. Okay, so we solved that problem, but then Rav Chisda will continue and ask from the next law, umittameh la v'acha midoraita v'ya mittameh la umidrabanan mittameh la ba'al. Here, this says that the husband, if he's a kohen, is allowed to become tameh to bury his minor wife, even though he's a kohen. Well, here on a doraita level, only her father's house can bury her. They have the obligation, and not she's not really married yet on the doraita level. But on the Rabbanan level, they say yes, you can override the prohibition against becoming tameh and become tameh for this minor wife of yours. See, Rav Chisda tells Rabbah the rabbis can uproot the law of the Torah. And the Rabbah answers, Mishum davya la met mitzvah. No, we consider her like a met mitzvah, someone who has a corpse that there's no one around to bury, even a kohen. may go and bury and become tameh for met mitzvah. There's no one else to bury her. Now we say, met mitzvah. Wait a second. Is she a met mitzvah? Tanya ezo met mitzvah kol she'en lo kobrin korev acharim onin oto and ze met mitzvah. Met mitzvah means anyone that there's no one around to bury that person. That if you call, and people will come, then that's not a met mitzvah. In other words, if a kohen is going on the road and he sees a dead body, but there's lots of people around, so call. Has anybody can help out with this? So then he doesn't become tameh. There's other people, and for sure, if the person has relatives, and she has relatives, so why doesn't this husband kohen just go and call the relatives, call the mother, call the brother, call the brother, and say, sorry to tell you that your brother died. Please take care of the burial. So this is not a met mitzvah when there are other people around. And so we answer, in this case, it is in fact a met mitzvah, because we already established that her family cannot take her inheritance. So when he calls, they're not going to answer, right? This is why should we bother ourselves and pay the expenses of her burial when you're the one, right? The adult husband, you're the one that's getting the inheritance. So they're not going to answer. Okay, I don't know if that means they would leave their sister unburied, but the point is that they would be reluctant to do it. So since he gets the inheritance, all the primary responsibility is going to be in fact on him, and therefore he is allowed. This is not uprooting a biblical law, because after all, it's a met mitzvah. It's categorized as a met mitzvah, and a kohen can become tameh for a met mitzvah. All right, and lastly, the last law in this regard, this man can allow his minor wife, to eat terumah. Now, this is eating terumah. She's a bat Yisrael. She's not allowed to eat terumah. And now you're saying because of a derabanan marriage, that a drabanan marriage, that's going to entitle her to eat terumah? How could that be? And we answer, bitumah drabanan. Well, it's terumah, that's only terumah on a drabanan level. For example, you took terumah from something that grew in an unperforated pot. So that, since it's drabanan anyway, drabanan terumah only on the drabanan level, and she's married on the drabanan level, she can eat that terumah, but it does not mean that she can eat terumah on a deoraita level. All of these okimtot are somewhat forced, but in any case, that's how Rabbah defend himself against the attacks of Rav Chisda. So far, Rabbah is safe, but Rav Chisda is not giving up yet, and is going to continue to challenge Rabbah with other cases where we see that the rabbis have the power to uproot a law of the Torah, and so we'll see several more such proofs on the next daf. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen.